At exactly 2:11 a.m., the lights that bathed Christ the Redeemer in soft gold went out all at once, as if swallowed by the sky itself. Carlos Arana, alone in the control station built into the mountain's slope, blinked hard in the sudden darkness. A distant hum died. The statue above him became a silhouette against the clouds, impossibly silent. Carlos had worked maintenance on the monument for over a decade, long enough to recognize the familiar tremble of old circuits or failing transformers. But this wasn't that. This was too clean, too total. No sparks, no flicker, no warning. Just silence. And the soft, unmistakable sound of something metallic shifting high above, inside the statue. He stepped outside, squinting up at the enormous shadow of the Christ. The night air pressed against him, thick and warm, and the usual soundscape of cicadas and distant traffic seemed muted, dampened. From this angle, the head of the statue was invisible. But someone, was standing in the crook of its outstretched arms. Too still to be wind-blown cloth, too wrong to be a trick of the eye. Carlos rushed back inside and tapped the monitor bank. Only static, until he reached the feed from camera 04, the internal maintenance cam inside the crown. The screen crackled, then stabilized. A figure stood there in the darkness, facing outward, motionless. No ID badge, no tools, no flashlight, no reason to be there. His radio hissed when he tried to call for backup, the static rising to a shriek before dying out. He switched channels, tried again. Nothing. From above, through the steel staircase that ran the length of the statue's spine, came another sound, metal scraping against stone, deliberate and slow. He took one step toward the stairwell but stopped cold when the live feed began to flicker. The figure blurred, reappeared, then vanished. The screen went black again. Carlos looked behind him instinctively, but the room was empty, except for something new on the floor near the equipment rack. It was a key, not modern, old, heavy, almost ceremonial in shape, with a twisted iron handle and a symbol etched into the shaft. He picked it up, frowning, turning it over in his hand. The metal was warm as if it had just been held. He hadn't heard anyone enter. Behind him, one of the cameras, camera 07 trained on the eastern stairwell, clicked softly as it powered on. The monitor lit up for just a second, enough for him to see a shadow retreat into the wall, and something carved above the frame. No apagar novamente. By noon the next day, Carlos Arana was seated in a glass-walled office inside the maintenance headquarters, watching the incident footage play on loop. Except the footage wasn't from last night. The system had overwritten the hours between 2 and 3 a.m. with a clean, empty feed from 2 days earlier. It was perfect, too perfect. He confronted his supervisor, who offered a hollow smile and blamed a systemic corruption in the backup cycle. Carlos didn't push further, not with 2 uniformed men from the city's security department suddenly present, taking notes without asking questions. That night, he received a call on his personal phone, unlisted and rarely used. The voice on the other end was calm, female, and direct. "You saw something, didn't you? The figure. On camera 04, meet me at the Tijuca Overlook, midnight." Elena Souza was not police, not city maintenance, not clergy. She worked under a vague title in the Department of Historical Preservation. But what mattered was this. She had a copy of the electrical logs, and she showed him a detail he hadn't noticed. There had been no internal power drop. The blackout was initiated manually. Elena had been tracking anomalies around the statue for months. Strange minor surges, silent alarms, reports of footsteps in the spine when no one was logged in. "I thought it was faulty sensors. Until now." She paused, then added, "Until someone tried to erase you from the system." Together they examined the access blueprint of the Christ. One section was grayed out, a chamber labeled Support Cavity B. No entry listed. "Never completed," Carlos said. Just a dead end in the plans. Elena shook her head. It's not a dead end. It's just been sealed. Carlos pulled out the old key. Elena stared. That's not from any of our records, she murmured. The etching on the handle matched a faded emblem she'd once seen in a 1930s planning document, a symbol for auxiliary control. They agreed to investigate the next night under the pretense of equipment inspection. Just before leaving, Carlos passed by the locked hatch to the sealed chamber hidden beneath the eastern staircase. He slid the key into the ancient mechanism. It turned with difficulty. Then, click. From behind the door, something shifted. A soft, dull thud, like a box falling or someone moving. At dawn, Carlos's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No text, just a video. Grainy and handheld, it showed the outline of Christ the Redeemer in the distance, its arms faintly illuminated by the last glow before the blackout. Between those arms, two figures stood. One moved, the other didn't. The footage had been recorded from Vidigal, a hillside community with a direct line of sight to the statue. Elena traced the number to Luis Caprini, a former cable technician known for filming sky anomalies from his rooftop. They found him sitting outside his shack, surrounded by empty beer cans, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. I wasn't going to send it, Luis muttered, without waiting for them to ask. But the statue, it moved. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Not the whole thing, just the right arm. It shifted, like it was pointing. Elena pressed him for details. Luis hesitated. I've seen that statue every night for years. It's like a lighthouse. But that night, it wasn't watching the city, it was watching itself. Carlos raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Luis pointed to his head. You ever feel like something's alive just because it's too still? They reviewed the video together. Though distorted, the timestamp confirmed it was filmed at 2:03 a.m., 7 minutes before the official blackout. The first figure seemed human, leaning forward slightly. The second, taller, rigid, never moved. But between frames it simply vanished. Luis mentioned an old access point he used years ago when installing service lines for city equipment, an internal passage near the heart of the statue that was welded shut after a fatal fall. He said workers called it the cavity, and none liked going near it. The next morning, Carlos and Elena returned to speak with him again. But Luis was gone. His front door hung open, his belongings untouched. The only unusual thing, his phone cracked on the floor with the battery removed. The police dismissed it. Caprini's a ghost, always was. Probably took off chasing some new theory. But beneath his mattress, Elena found a sketchbook. Its pages were chaotic, scribbles, half-erased words, repeated phrases. O braço não termina ali, sombra no coração, quem vigia os olhos. One image stopped them cold. The statue, seen from above, with a third arm extending back into the rock of the mountain, hidden, outstretched and reaching. Inside the municipal archives, the air smelled of dust and disuse, metal shelves lined with forgotten blueprints, boxes with handwritten tags and microfilm reels from decades past. Elena had pulled special authorization to access the confidential projects section, using her credentials from the Department of Historical Preservation. Carlos followed silently, still shaken by Luis's disappearance. They located the original construction plans of Christ the Redeemer, dated 1922 to 1931. Spread across the table, the documents revealed multiple revisions, annotations in French and Portuguese, and several pages marked as non-autorisé. One drawing, folded within a sealed envelope, showed something neither of them expected. A vertical chamber running the full height of the statue, terminating in a void behind the heart. This isn't on any modern blueprint, Carlos whispered. Elena traced the lines with her finger. The cavity Luis mentioned, it was real. and planned from the beginning. Another set of documents detailed the work schedule of a man named Tadeu Lima, listed as an electrical apprentice. His name appeared consistently until October 1930. No termination, no transfer. Just a red line crossing his record and a marginal note. Perda estrutural por falha humana, sem corpo. Attached to his file was a faded page from a personal notebook. There were journal entries, disjointed, feverish, describing a hum inside the statue and feelings of being watched from within. The final line read, "Ele está preso nas paredes, mas só até a luz falhar." Carlos leaned back, visibly disturbed. They lost someone in there and never recovered him. Elena nodded slowly, and they buried the chamber under paperwork. She then pulled out a small photo stapled to the journal. It showed a group of workers at the base of the statue, one of whom was staring directly at the camera despite being in the background. His eyes were completely shadowed, though the rest of the image was well lit. On his vest, a symbol identical to the one on the old key Carlos had found. That night, Carlos sat alone at home, flipping through the scanned plans again. On a whim, he overlaid two versions of the statue's inner structure, the original and the most recent. They didn't align. The new blueprint was subtly off-center, concealing an entire chamber. As he stared, the lights in his apartment flickered once, twice. On the third flicker, his phone lit up with a new message. No apaga de novo. At 2:00 a.m., under the pretense of a standard inspection, Carlos and Elena bypassed the main security system using an outdated maintenance login. The monument was empty, the staff long gone, and the night was still. The only sounds were their footsteps on the iron stairs and the distant hum of Rio far below. They entered through the eastern service hatch and descended into a section labeled non-functional, sealed off decades earlier. Carlos inserted the old key into the ancient lock. With a heavy groan, the mechanism gave way. The door swung open, revealing a narrow vertical shaft lined with rusted metal steps and the stale scent of closed air. The space was suffocating. The walls narrowed as they descended, and the only light came from Carlos's headlamp, which flickered occasionally without reason. Halfway down, Elena paused, noticing something scratched into the wall. A date, 1930. And beneath it, a series of names, some crossed out violently. One name hadn't been crossed out. Tadeu. Carlos whispered the name, and the light flickered again. Far below, a faint mechanical click echoed upward, as if something had been triggered by sound, or by recognition. At the base of the shaft, they found a small dome-shaped chamber, circular, lined with concrete panels. At the center, an old camera stood on a rusted tripod, aimed at the entrance. To their shock, the red light on the camera was still blinking. Elena leaned in to check it. "No power source," she muttered. "How is it still recording?" Carlos looked through the lens. The viewfinder didn't show the chamber. It showed Rio, but it was still, completely still. Not a single car moved. No lights flickered. The entire city looked frozen in a moment outside of time. Suddenly, a shrill, dissonant tone pierced the silence. Neither of them could tell where it came from. The sound wasn't loud, but it was unbearable, like something resonating directly in their bones. They backed away instinctively, and as they did, the door behind them slammed shut with a metallic clang. Carlos rushed to the handle. It was locked from the outside. Elena hit the emergency light switch, but it didn't respond. As panic started to rise, Carlos noticed something even more disturbing. Along the curved wall, a fresh line had appeared. Wet ink spelling the words, "Estão vendo agora." They weren't alone, and someone or something was watching. They escaped through a forgotten emergency exit hidden behind a decaying equipment panel, an old ladder shaft that led to a lateral service hatch beneath the statue's base. When they emerged into the cold night, both were gasping, drenched in sweat, their ears still ringing from the high-pitched tone that had no source. The experience left Carlos shaken and silent for hours. Elena, meanwhile, couldn't stop replaying what they'd seen through the old camera. A city suspended, unnaturally still, as if frozen in another dimension. "Whatever that camera's connected to," she said, "it's not this present." Elena dove deeper into historical records, searching for non-public documents, private correspondence between the original engineers, clergy, and donors of the monument. In a letter dated May 1929, one phrase stood out: "A estrutura suportará o peso da fé e ocultará o que não deve ver o mundo." She found references to a group of engineers who had been removed from the project late in its construction. Quietly, with no official explanation. One was a French structuralist named Léo Dumas. Dumas' personal journal, archived in the Sorbonne, described the Christo project as a vessel for observation and mentioned a theory he called axis isolation. According to Dumas, the chamber behind the heart was built to be acoustically and temporally neutral, a space where perception and memory degraded over time. He believed the structure would act as a filter for certain kinds of energy or consciousness, and that it had to remain sealed at all costs. Carlos began experiencing symptoms he couldn't explain. He'd catch glimpses of people watching him, always from below. He started drawing without realizing it, on napkins, notebooks, even walls. Each time, the same image, a man inside the statue, looking out from where no window existed. Then Elena was approached by a man in a dark blue maintenance uniform outside her apartment building. He didn't introduce himself, he simply said, "You opened what should have stayed sealed." Before she could respond, he turned the corner and vanished. Security cameras captured nothing. Back in her office, she found a package with no return address. Inside, a spool of analog film labeled Christo 7M. It had no date, no notes, just 7 minutes of content. Elena set it on her desk, staring. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the feeling she wasn't alone in the room. Something in the air had shifted, as if whatever was inside that chamber had followed them out. Elena didn't take the film to a lab. She used her own analog projector, the one her father left behind, tucked into a closet since her university days. She locked the door, closed the blinds, and turned off her phone. No witnesses, no copies, just her, the spool, and the screen. The reel was labeled Christo 7M. It began in silence without countdown or timestamp. The first frame showed the inner chamber, empty, dimly lit by a flickering bulb. Then, a man entered, Carlos. But he didn't look the same. He moved slower, unblinking as if underwater. Elena leaned forward. The angle was impossible. The camera was positioned from inside the wall itself, as though the structure had an eye. Carlos looked directly at it, no recognition in his face. Then a voice, garbled and reversed, echoed faintly. "No olhe para trás." The next sequence was disjointed. Flashes of the city from impossible perspectives, views from above the clouds, shots of empty streets in full daylight, but with no shadows. The camera returned to the chamber. A second figure now stood in the corner, taller, rigid, its face obscured by blur, even though the rest of the image was sharp. Elena paused the reel. Her hands were clammy. She rewound 30 seconds and played it again. The second figure never entered the frame. It was simply there from one moment to the next, like a thought remembered halfway through a sentence. In the 6th minute, the camera zoomed in on Carlos's face. His eyes were moving rapidly, scanning the room, but his body remained frozen. He opened his mouth slowly, and the audio returned, just 2 words. Sete voltas. 7 turns. The final minute was footage from the statue's crown. The camera panned over the city, except the city was gone. In its place was a sea of motionless figures, all facing the statue, all identical in shape and height. The image cracked near the end, warped by heat or distortion, as a low-frequency hum filled the room. The film ended. Elena sat in silence, breathing shallowly. Her phone buzzed. One notification. A text from Carlos's number. "Estou quase no topo. Se eu não descer, não siga." She looked at the reel still spinning, as if it hadn't finished. But the film had ended. What kept spinning was the projector. The message led Elena back to the base of the monument just before dawn. A thick fog clung to the mountain, curling around the statue's legs like smoke. She climbed the outer service stairway, heart pounding with every step. Carlos had said he was near the top, but there was no sign of him. Inside the spine of the statue, the air was colder than it should have been. The lights flickered as she passed, some failing entirely. At the heart-level access point, she found the hatch ajar. Inside, silence. No wind, no sound, just the chamber, and Carlos. He stood in the center, facing the curved wall, unmoving. Elena approached slowly. His eyes were open, his expression blank, as if caught in deep concentration or suspended thought. "Carlos," she whispered. No reaction. His skin was pale, damp with sweat, his hands shaking slightly at his sides. She circled him, placing herself in his field of vision. "You sent me the message. You said not to follow, but I'm here." His lips parted. 7 rotations. Then it opens. Elena looked around. "What opens?" He pointed behind her. The wall. Carved into the wall, almost invisible without direct light, was a spiral pattern, 7 lines etched into the stone. Elena traced them with her fingers, one by one. As she completed the 7th, the ground beneath them trembled with a deep, slow vibration. A portion of the wall slid inward, revealing a second chamber, smaller, impossibly dark. From within came a sound that was neither a voice nor a machine, something low, ancient, reverberating. Carlos stepped forward. Elena grabbed his arm, but he turned to her, finally meeting her gaze. "I've seen it," he said. "It's not a thing, it's a memory, one that doesn't belong to us." She tried to pull him back, but the chamber pulsed, and with it, her vision blurred. She saw the city, not as it was, but as it had been. Then, as it might be. A million eyes turned upward, and the light of the statue went out again. When Elena woke, she was outside, at the base. The sun was rising. Her clothes were damp with dew. The statue loomed above, unchanged, silent. There was no sign of Carlos, no sign of the open chamber. In her pocket, a stone spiral, the same one carved in the wall. Behind her, a new worker approached the site, keyring in hand. One key, old and rusted, swung gently as he walked. The camera above clicked on,